Bom dia, boa tarde, boa noite, or whatever the case may be. My name is Marcus, and I am the host of the Black Brazil Today YouTube channel, as well as the blackbraziltoday.com blog, where I analyze Brazil from the perspective of race. So today I wanted to switch it up a little bit. I wanted to move into some areas that I hadn't really previously discussed, even though, well, I'll say I haven't discussed thoroughly because I have hinted at these topics somewhat over the years. But because of some of the interest that I've been getting from followers and just people who I have conversations with, there's some definitely some areas of let's just say topics that I think a lot of people might be interested in. That because of what's been going on, just say in the last couple of years, it's something that I'm increasingly open to discussing. Now, some years ago, I had a guy that I knew in Sao Paulo who was saying to me, you should try to diversify this blog a little bit more, talk a little bit more about this, a little bit more about that. But at the time, I felt like, the topics that he was asking me to get into, I didn't feel like they fit in my blog's message that much. I have a core audience and a core group of topics that I talked about. So at the time, I wasn't really interested in expanding in the directions that he thought would be a successful move. But there are topics that I feel like, well, when I get into some of these topics, I feel like they can still fit into my main topics because there are some areas in which, whether I'm talking about just people in general, I'm talking about Black people or non-Black people, these areas are going to affect everybody. And so that's something that I wanted to take on a little bit more, particularly with the interest in what I'm finding in what they call the Black manosphere. I'm finding a lot of people are interested in discussing, how's it, what's going on in Brazil in terms of how people are dating, what are Brazilian women like? And I feel like there is something missing there because, I've had experiences with Brazil for 22 years now. So it's something that I feel like a lot of areas I can speak on where I see a lot of people who are considering getting to know the country or, other countries around the world. It seems like sometimes they oversimplify things or they don't really have a full understanding of what's going on in Brazil. So that's something that I wanted to talk a little bit more about. I feel like, well, maybe I can offer some resources that will clarify some misconceptions that people might have about Brazil, Brazilian women, relationships, and the like. But before I get into that, there's a whole bunch of other topics that I want to touch on. You know, uh, as we all develop in our understandings of what it is that we're experiencing living in this world, there are certain viewpoints that we may have that could change after some time after you get exposed to some new information. And that's something that's definitely applied to me in recent years. There's been a slow drift in my perceptions of certain topics. And that's not to say I've flipped on all of them, but there are definitely a few where I feel like I've had to change my position on some things. The race topic for one is something that I've definitely had to change my perspective on, because for years, if I listen to certain activists in Brazil, people are under the perception that says, look, all Black and brown people in Brazil are considered Black. Black meaning preto, or in Portuguese, preto meaning Black, whereas pardo, a lot of people don't like to really translate that word, but it's like you can translate it as brown or somebody who's mixed. It's some people consider the pardo to be a mestizo. There is no one word I think that can encompass and fairly translate the term pardo. But the key point here is that for years, people have argued that Preto and Pardo go together as representation of Brazil's black population. And I still believe that to a degree, but I've had to change my views also to a certain degree after my experiences in Brazil and coming across quite a few people who I would say it's really difficult to categorize this person as black or white. So, they a lot of them actually just do belong in that middle category. All right. So in future videos and blog posts, I'm going to be introducing some new topics. And it's something that I'm really excited about. Today is going to be an example of some of the new directions that I'm going to be taking on. And as I said, in some ways it's not new, but in some ways it's entirely new. So let's just get into it. Today, the topic again is the singer Anitta. Now, if you remember a couple of weeks back, I did a video that talked about how Anitta became the first Brazilian to win a video music award in the United States, which, it was a big deal, right? Um, and I said in that video, like I can actually say I'm pretty impressed with Anitta's ascension in the global pop music world. I mean, being Brazilian, coming out of Latin America, there's a lot of obstacles to Brazilian artists becoming internationally known. Anitta solidified her status as a superstar in Brazil, and she learned English. She started reaching out to media outlets in the United States. Then, when you had the globalization in music, particularly with online music platforms like Spotify, she's able to reach an entirely new audience that may not have been possible just 10 or 15 years ago. So I've always said, in terms of Anitta, her being able to amass the type of wealth that she has earned over the last, what, I don't know, what is it, 7 years now, 7 or 8 years? It's incredible, particularly for an artist whose first language is not English. It's not coming out of, Australia, United States, or Great Britain or any place like that. She's coming out of Brazil. And if you saw the last video, you see that the amount of money that she's been able to attain over these, I don't know, like I said, somewhere between 6 and 8 years she's been out, and her wealth has surpassed some well-known American superstars. So, on the financial side, and in terms of her position in global pop music, I admire that. That's definitely a success story to speak about. But then there's the flip side of Anitta, and that flip side is that a lot of people, a lot of Brazilians in particular, are not happy with the images that she promotes around the world. It's like, I did a video another other couple of weeks ago where a woman wrote an article saying, when people hear the terms Brazilian women, what pops up in their mind? And whatever that image is, why is it that people outside of Brazil have this certain image that comes to mind when they think of Brazilian women? And so because of that, a lot of Brazilian women, more on the conservative side, have taken, issue with how Anitta presents herself on the global scale. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this today. This this piece today is entitled "Singer Anitta is a Superstar," but for some, she is a terrible example with which to educate girls, but that modern women feminists turned a blind eye to. So let's just get into this article. I think that speaks volumes about what this article is going to be discussing here. Of course, this is the singer Anitta. Um, what I find with Anitta, as I find with a lot of other female artists, is that she seems to be willing to push the envelope in whatever way is necessary in order for her to become a household name. What's the positive side of that? What's the negative side? Obviously, the positive side is that she's amassed a fortune estimated at over 530 million reais. But with the exchange rate between the dollar and the real, that's about $100 million. But still, that again, that's very impressive for somebody who came out of, you know, we'll say very humble background to, getting where she is now. That is a phenomenal achievement. But at what point, how much of yourself do you have to sell in terms of your soul and your being in order to amass that type of wealth? And we've seen plenty of examples of this in the United States. So it's not just Anitta is just an example. What I'm saying in this article and what the women whose article I will be reacting to, what they are saying applies to a lot of we'll say pop stars, movie stars, television stars in the United States. So let's just get into this because I think it's an intriguing topic. Um, so in our own time frames of personal development, there will come times when we must be willing and able to consider opposing opinions that go against our own beliefs. Better still, when such openly opposing beliefs are already part of our train of thought, lurking somewhere in the mental vault. For years, there have been times when I've gone along with something, even though in the not so deeper areas of my soul, I knew I couldn't co-sign on certain things. I've always felt this way about American gangster rap. I remember my first experiences with the genre back in the late 80s and early 90s. Some of the violent lyrics I heard were often shocking to my system. I remember years ago riding in a car with a work colleague. We had got off work and we were riding home. Uh, the brother's name was Frank. He was driving. I was in the passenger seat, and we were riding down the road, and he was listening to the 1991 classic gangster rap CD, FL for Zaggin, which spelled backwards means becomes niggas for life, by the popular West Coast rap group NWA. On the way home, the first track I heard in Frank's car was the song entitled One Less Bitch, in which rappers Dr. Dre and MC Ren graphically detail how they killed women. As Frank drove, bobbing his head to the beat, I remember thinking to myself, man, what's up with these lyrics? They were so morbid. The groove, which featured a classic sample of a Barry White track, was sonically hypnotic. That was perhaps the trap with gangster rap. The lyrics were pure evil, but the beats were slamming. The release would go on to become the number one album in America 1 week after its release, which meant a lot of kids, teens, and adults across the color line were listening to this album. Later that year, another CD's lyrics would strike me the same way. It was the first solo album of popular Ghetto Boys rapper Scarface, entitled Mr. Scarface is Back. Again, hardcore funk beats paired with explicit lyrics depicting violence, murder, dope deals, and sex. Before these albums were released in the early 1990s, another rap group that pushed the envelope on explicit lyrical content was the Miami-based group known as the Two Live Crew. Anyone who is familiar with the Two Live Crew knows that their music was basically pornography put to music. Whether we're talking gangster or sex rap, we all knew that this music was X-rated, definitely not meant for minors, and possibly having negative influences on young, impressionable minds. But more than that, as these types of albums went from being underground to, within a few years and certainly within a decade, going mainstream, one has to step back at a certain point and wonder what the effect of such music would have on a society as a whole. Clearly, there were those who rejected this type of music and labeled it as trash. In fact, on the aforementioned FL4 Zaggin album, NWA seemed to revel in the manner in which some people vehemently rejected the content of their music. The beginning of the track, Niggas for Life, featured a montage of voices decrying NWA's music. The voices are heard saying that the music and the way it talks about women was BS, and they didn't want their kids listening to this type of music. But the fact is that in the entertainment business, people who are willing to use vulgarity, present adult-oriented content, dress and talk provocatively are often rewarded with lots of money, fame, and rewards. Now, I have to say that in my years of research of looking into the entertainment industry, we'll say, when you look behind the scenes, you pull back the curtains and you take a look, you come to understand that there are a lot of deals that go on behind the scenes. And those people who are willing to, quote unquote, sell their souls, they seem to be the ones who get very far in the music industry. But you have to wonder, what is the downside? What are they sacrificing in order to get ahead and to make all of the money that they have access to? There's been a number of entertainers who've spoken out on what goes on in the entertainment business. There's been books, there's been magazine articles, People have spoken out. So it's like there's enough information out there now that we can't even deny what's going on. If you want to know why there seems to be so much like sex and violence in music and movies, television programs, it becomes very clear. When people speak their truths, sometimes people are not going to go too far where they feel like their lives could be in danger, but they reveal enough to know, like, okay, we're going to give you this amount of money, but don't rock the boat. So you make your choice. It's like you're going to move into the music entertainment, the music business, or the movie business, or whatever it might be. You can be prepared to sacrifice at least a little bit of your soul, if not much of it, in exchange for that that fame and fortune, right? Anyway, I'm not going to front as if I didn't participate in this slow moral decadence going on in the music industry, as I watched and bobbed my head just like everyone else did, even as my conscience would never really let me fully enjoy it. Sometime in the mid 90s, as I started to research politics, journalism, the music, film, and television industries, I started to understand what was going on. Somewhere along the way, I began to catch on to the fact that everything and everyone that were placed in front of our unsuspecting eyes were players in the scheme for destroying the moral fabric of society. I mean, is anybody out there who can really deny that? When you compare some of the stuff that people watch, say back in the 50s and 60s, obviously I wasn't alive in the 50s. Um, when you compare some of the wholesome television that you had back then, and then you compare it to what we see in film and television now, there's an extreme difference. I go back to the mid 50s in the development of the rock and roll industry, rock and roll music. There were a lot of topics that were considered taboo in some of the music. I mean, if you consider what the original lyrics to Little Richard talked about, the original lyrics in his song Tutti Frutti, but they were so dirty that they had to clean it up to try to, break the record. But then you get into like the 80s and the 90s, and people were, saying whatever they wanted to say on these records, to the point where at a certain point, I remember it had to be, what was about 85, when the wife of former Democratic Vice President Al Gore, Tipper Gore, came up with this program where she wanted to put, warning labels on album covers to warn parents of explicit material that their kids might be listening to. Compare that just 30, 40 years ago to some of the stuff that you hear in hip hop records nowadays. And it's not even just hip hop. It seems that, pop music in general has just, you could say it's been, I don't know, it's been widely influenced by what would, like, the porn industry, for example. We know there's quite a few people out there who have these sides of their personalities that says, look, I'm gonna do whatever it takes to make the money. So this, at this point, there's nothing that we can really deny about what we're seeing in music, movies, and television. It's pretty obvious. I'm gonna go back and just restart this paragraph, because as I got sidetracked by some thoughts that came to my mind, I want to say this full paragraph as it appears. Somewhere along the way, I began to catch on to the fact that everything and everyone that were placed in front of our unsuspecting eyes were players in the scheme for destroying the moral fabric of society. That included any sort of social, political, musical, or media oriented movement that seemed to just pop up out of nowhere. Oftentimes, these things are presented as something cool or even positive, but upon closer inspection, frequently they were the exact opposite. And if one isn't careful, the degradation, hedonism, evil, X-rated, foul, and deceptive can easily become the norm. Several weeks ago, I posted a story about the singer Anitta becoming the first Brazilian to win a Video Music Award. I had to admit that Anitta's commercial success was astounding, as she had even managed to out earn a number of prominent American entertainers. No small feat for a woman from a Latin American country. But on the flip side of Anitta's success and the culture for which she represents, there is a portion of Brazilian society that is none too pleased with the singer's success. Funk music in Brazil emerged out of the 1980s Black dances in the poor peripheries of large cities such as Rio de Janeiro. These favela slum beats would soon adapt Miami bass style rhythms, mix them with highly sexualized lyrics, and become all the rage in these poor communities. As the music and culture originated in mostly Black and poor neighborhoods, it was an easy target for a Brazil that belittled and denigrated anything associated with the Black population. Understanding the struggle for recognition and respect of Afro Brazilians, part of me supported the funk beats and culture, but similar to how my conscience spoke to me as I enjoyed gangster rap and sex rhymes in the American music scene, some parts of the funk culture coming out of Brazil didn't quite sit well with me either. Over the years, I'd read hundreds of insulting comments about funk, with phrases such as funky é lixo, meaning funk is trash, becoming not only a catchphrase, but in some cases, the names of whole blogs dedicating to trashing the genre. If you're honest with yourself and stand by whatever it is that you believe, there comes a time when you must at least hear what opposing views have to say about certain topics. If you're not willing to challenge your views, perhaps it is true that deep down you know that you really can't defend your position. I have never been a fan of Brazilian funk in terms of musical quality, just as I have never been a fan of Miami bass. Besides that, looking at the lifestyles of some of the people that participate in the culture of these genres, I must again ask, where is all of this going, and should we allow our children to be seduced by it? I'm just asking a question. Below the blog that's featured in this article, I'm introducing this material because they've consistently pointed out the issues that they have with artists such as Anitta and what they represent. And quite frankly, they go in on her on a number of articles on this blog. Now, if you're an Anitta fan, you may not like this critique, but I believe that the more critical side of an analysis should always be heard and also be heard. Lest someone think I am simply picking on Brazil, when I think of what's going on in the US, these are clearly aspects of the conversation that apply to folks like Nicki Minaj, Cardi B, and Megan Thee Stallion. The point that I'm making here is all the more relevant when we consider the fact that Cardi B herself won't even allow her own daughter to listen to her music. I mean, think about that for a minute. You know, she's made some pretty risque music and she's made, millions of dollars, selling this vulgar music to people. But she doesn't want her daughter to hear this music. She just doesn't want her daughter exposed to this. But yet, put it out in the public anyway. Let other people consume it. What does that say? What is her value system? So check it out below. There will be more from where this comes from as I begin to take a deep dive into topics that I hadn't previously touched upon on this blog. So, again, this is a screenshot from one of Anitta's videos. And again, the title of this article is A Terrible Example to Educate Girls, but which modern women feminists seem to turn a blind eye. I took this article from a blog called Mulheres contra o Feminismo, which means women against feminism. I don't know how many people are involved in this particular blog, if it's just one blogger or several, but the whole blog is just giving a critical analysis of what they think feminism is bringing to society. Agree or disagree. Both sides should be heard in terms of this, in terms of this discussion. So this is taken from the blogging. So this part of this analysis and the text that I'm reading here, this comes from the blog. Okay. The part that I introduced before, those were all of my thoughts, but now I'm moving into the material from the Mulheres contra o Feminismo blog. So we posted about the vulgarity of funkeira, Anitta, in a past post, and how we should never be proud of this kind of woman representing us. Funkeira means a person who's a funk singer or funk musician. Once again, the feminist funkeira shows her vulgarity. She allies her image to the Brazilian woman, and feminists use her commercial success to show off her vulgarity, which even influences younger girls who stop dedicating themselves to their studies and spend more time getting lost with sex clips on social networks. Unfortunately, things from the empowered and feminine Brazil. But as almost always, the ego and collective feminist hysteria of the modern woman causes aunts, mothers-in-law, wives, and genitors to push dubious feminine behavior from child murder to supporting vulgarity and sex tourism under the rug. Of course, the support happens as long as the perpetuators are women, because many imbeciles believe more in catchphrases like, a girl's place should be wherever she wants. I am against my husband in this sexist society, and support feminists who indoctrinate their daughters, granddaughters, and nieces when in fact they should support their husband, their father, and decently educate their daughters away from Instagram and other social networks without pushing it under the rug for feminists like Anitta and the like. You'll notice if you've ever checked out any Anitta's photos and her videos, she seems to have a knack for just making, making suggestive poses, suggestive photos, suggestive clothing that she wears, on stage during her performances. I mean, she's not pulling any punches. She's showing you exactly what she's all about. It's like she's willing to do whatever it seems, to make that money. Unfortunately, it seems that the modern woman's feminine ego, as always, makes them run away from responsibility and reasoning, but instead blame men for the BS that the same women do. Anitta has been supporting feminism for a long time, spewing out the vulgarity of Brazilian women who worldwide outdo themselves compared to other women, and has been in the spotlight for being popular among women who even complain about being objectified. Of course, sex sells. But if a man were so vulgar when objectifying women, he would either be condemned or loved, like the marginals who sing funk songs during the garbage called Carnival or at dances in the periphery. Anitta, who behaves like a badass when she wants to hire women for sex, like a good feminist, seems to be defended by modern women who turn a blind eye and let their daughters, granddaughters, and nieces watch clips and interviews of the vulgar funkeira. To no surprise to any rational person, Brazilian women around the world continue to have a reputation as prostitutes, and this with the support of women, some of whom even pretend to be conservative or religious. This happens abroad where I live, but here in Brazil, Brazilian feminism is surpassing itself every day. I must congratulate my fellow Brazilian women, childish, vulgar, and lacking in responsibility, who surpass themselves in making me and some others feel ashamed, both in Brazil and abroad. Again, this is taken from the Mulheres contra o Feminismo blog. They have a lot of critical things to say about people like Anitta and what they see coming out of the feminist movement, as well as some of the aspirations of what they call modern women, right? So this was just an introduction. There's a whole lot more that needs to be said about some of these topics, so stay tuned. I'm going to be diving a little bit more into this, because as the discussions continues to heat up, in areas like YouTube, I thought it would be intriguing to take a look at how all of this is playing out in Brazil. So that's what I'm going to be moving towards in the coming weeks. And I'm hoping you all come along for the ride. Definitely, if you like this video, if you learned something, share your thoughts in the comment section. Consider subscribing to the channel. Like and share this video. It's the only way that the channel will grow. And definitely smash that notification button so you'll be alerted when I put up some new material. And with that said, I hope to see you all in the next video.